You're black. You hurt my wife. Billionaire accuses waitress. The truth comes out in the most shocking way. What if a black waitress was accused by a billionaire of poisoning his wife, simply because of the color of her skin? Ayanna Simmons moved through the pinnacle with the grace of someone who'd mastered the art of invisibility. At 24, she was a fixture at the high-end restaurant, her warm smile and quick wit a quiet rebellion against the microaggressions she faced nightly. Her dark eyes held stories, of late nights studying culinary textbooks, of dreams scribbled in a worn notebook she kept tucked in her apron. Ayanna wasn't just a waitress, she was a woman with a vision. She wanted to open her own restaurant one day, a place where soul food met fine dining, where every dish told a story of resilience. But for now, she was saving every tip, every paycheck, for culinary school, dodging the subtle sneers of wealthy patrons who assumed she was less than them. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with its usual Friday night energy. Atlanta's elite filled the tables, politicians, tech moguls, and old money families, their egos as polished as the silverware. Ayanna wove through the crowd, balancing plates of seared scallops and glasses of vintage Bordeaux. Her braids were neatly pulled back, her uniform crisp despite the sweat beading at her temples. She was used to the pressure, the constant scrutiny. She'd learned to let the small slights roll off her, customers who avoided her gaze, who spoke to her like she was beneath them. But she never let it break her. She had too much to lose. At table 12, by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline, sat Richard and Samantha Moore. Richard, a billionaire real estate tycoon, was a regular at the pinnacle. His sharp suits and sharper tongue made him a formidable presence. At 55, his silver hair and commanding demeanor screamed power, but his charm was a carefully crafted mask. Samantha, his wife of 15 years, was a former model, her beauty softened by time but still striking. They were a couple who thrived on appearances, their marriage a public performance of wealth and perfection. Ayanna had served them dozens of times, memorizing their preferences. Richard's steak rare, Samantha's salads nut-free due to her severe peanut allergy. Ayanna was meticulous about it, double-checking every order with the kitchen. Mistakes weren't an option, not for her. The night started like any other. Ayanna approached their table with a tray of drinks, a bourbon neat for Richard, a sparkling water with lemon for Samantha. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Moore," she said, her voice steady, professional. "Your appetizers will be out shortly." Samantha offered a small smile, but Richard barely glanced up from his phone. Ayanna didn't mind. She was used to being invisible to people like him. Back in the kitchen, the chaos was controlled but relentless. Chef Marco, a temperamental Italian with a knack for perfection, barked orders at the line cooks. "No cross-contamination on table 12, he shouted, pointing at Samantha's salad. Ayanna hovered nearby, confirming the dish was peanut-free. She always did. Her attention to detail was her armor, her way of proving she belonged in a world that often told her she didn't. But as Ayanna set the drinks down at table 12, the air shifted. Richard's eyes narrowed, his face darkening like a storm cloud. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. You hurt my wife," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the restaurant. The room fell silent, forks pausing mid-air, conversations dying. Ayanna froze, her heart pounding. "What?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's accusation hit like a tidal wave. "I know what you did," he continued, pointing a trembling finger at Ayanna. "My wife had a reaction to something in her food. She's allergic to nuts, and I saw you bring her a dish with peanuts in it. You did this on purpose." Samantha stood beside him, clutching her throat, her face pale. A small crowd of diners craned their necks, some whispering, others recording on their phones. Ayanna's mind raced. She hadn't served the entrees yet, just the drinks. The salad was still in the kitchen, and she'd checked it herself. "Sir, I swear," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "I didn't put peanuts in anything. I checked the order twice. I would never." "You're lying." Richard cut her off, his face red with rage. "You're nothing but a careless waitress, and now my wife could have died because of you." The word careless stung, but it was the way he said you that cut deeper, laced with a venom that felt personal. Ayana's hands trembled, but she held her ground, her eyes locked on Richard's. She knew what this was. She'd felt it before, the weight of assumptions, the sting of being judged by her skin before her actions. The restaurant's manager, James, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a perpetually stressed expression, hurried over. "Mr. Moore, please, let's calm down," he said, his voice strained. He glanced at Ayana, his eyes apologetic but firm. "Ayana, step outside. We'll sort this out." Ayana's heart sank. She knew what "sort this out" meant. It meant protecting the restaurant's reputation, appeasing the wealthy regular, even if it meant throwing her under the bus. She wanted to scream, to demand they check the kitchen, but the weight of every eye in the room pinned her in place. She nodded, her throat tight, and walked toward the back door, her steps heavy. Outside, the Atlanta night was warm, the city's lights glittering in the distance. Ayana leaned against the brick wall, her breath uneven. She felt the tears coming but fought them back. She couldn't cry, not now. She'd worked too hard, endured too much, to let this break her. But the fear was real. One accusation from a man like Richard Moore could ruin her. She'd seen it happen, black women blamed, fired, discarded without a second thought. Her dreams of culinary school, of her restaurant, felt like they were slipping through her fingers. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. It was Jalen, her older brother. At 32, Jalen was a detective with the Atlanta PD, a man who carried the weight of his badge with pride and protectiveness. "Ayana, I got a call from a friend at the Pinnacle," he said, his voice urgent. "They said some rich guy's accusing you of something." "What's going on?" Ayana's voice cracked as she explained, the words spilling out. "He says I put peanuts in his wife's food, Jalen. I didn't. I swear I didn't. But no one's listening to me." "Stay there," Jalen said, his tone sharp with determination. "I'm on my way. Don't let them push you out. You hear me? You're not the problem here." Ayana took a deep breath and walked back into the restaurant. The dining room was still tense, the air thick with anticipation. Richard was pacing near his table, his voice low but angry as he spoke to James. Samantha sat quietly, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Ayana's heart pounded, but Jalen's words echoed in her mind. "You're not the problem here." "Mr. Moore," Ayana said, stepping forward, her voice steadier now. "There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't put peanuts in your wife's food. I checked the order myself. Please, let's figure out what happened." Richard turned, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to talk," he snapped. "You're done here. I want her fired, James. Now." Before James could respond, the front door swung open, and Jalen strode in, his badge glinting under the chandeliers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding attention. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Mr. Moore," Jalen said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I need a word." Richard hesitated, his bravado faltering, but he followed Jalen to a corner of the restaurant. The diners watched, their whispers growing louder. Ayana stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly. She didn't know what Jalen was planning, but she trusted him. He'd always had her back, from the time they were kids in their grandmother's cramped apartment, dreaming of better days. Minutes later, Jalen returned, his expression a mix of anger and resolve. He addressed the room, his voice clear. "I've spoken with the kitchen staff and reviewed the order logs. Mrs. Moore's dish did contain traces of peanuts, but it wasn't Ayana's fault. The kitchen made a mistake, a new cook used the wrong oil. Ayana checked the dish as best she could, but the error was already made." The room murmured, but Jalen wasn't done. He turned to Richard, his eyes hard. "The real issue here, Mr. Moore, is why you were so quick to blame Ayana. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check with the staff. You saw a black woman serving you and assumed she was incompetent. Your words, your tone, they weren't just about the food. They were about her." Richard's face paled. He opened his mouth to protest, But Jalen held up a hand. There's more. The restaurant's security cameras caught your conversation with your wife before you accused Ayanna. You said, and I quote, "I bet it was that black waitress. They always mess things up." A gasp rippled through the room. Ayanna's breath caught in her throat. She'd known it, felt it, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. The diners shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others glaring at Richard. Samantha touched her husband's arm, her face flushed with embarrassment. Jalen pulled out his phone, showing a still from the security footage. "It's all here, Mr. Moore. Your words, your assumptions. And it's not just the cameras. People in this room have been recording. It's already online." Richard's eyes widened, his confidence crumbling. He glanced around, seeing the phones pointed at him, the judgmental stares. His carefully curated image, billionaire, philanthropist, untouchable, was unraveling in real time. Hashtags like #JusticeForAyanna and #EndDiscrimination were already trending on X, posted by diners who'd witnessed the scene. The internet was merciless, and Richard Moore was its latest target. The next morning, the Pinnacle's management issued a statement. Richard and Samantha Moore were banned from the restaurant, a decision that sent shockwaves through Atlanta's elite circles. James, the manager, personally apologized to Ayanna, his voice heavy with regret. "You didn't deserve this," he said. "We're making changes. Starting with you." He offered her a promotion to supervisor, a role that came with a raise and more responsibility. Ayanna accepted, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and exhaustion. But the real turning point came later that day. Ayanna's phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. She answered cautiously, expecting another reporter or curious stranger. Instead, it was Marcus Tate, a renowned restaurant investor who'd seen the viral story. "Ayanna," he said, his voice warm, "I've been following what happened. Your strength, your dignity, it's inspiring. I want to help you make your dream a reality. Let's talk about opening that restaurant of yours." Ayanna nearly dropped the phone. She'd spent years sketching menus, imagining a space where soul food and fine dining could coexist, where every guest felt valued. Now, someone believed in her vision. They met the following week, and Marcus offered her a partnership, complete with funding and mentorship. It was more than she'd dared to hope for. Months later, Ayanna stood in the kitchen of her new restaurant, Legacy. The walls were adorned with photos of her grandmother, whose recipes inspired the menu, and the space hummed with warmth and possibility. The opening night was packed, not just with Atlanta's elite but with everyday people. Black, white, young, old, all drawn by Ayanna's story. Every dish, from the braised oxtail to the peach cobbler tart, told a story of struggle, strength, and triumph. Richard Moore, meanwhile, faced a reckoning. His business empire took a hit as partners distanced themselves, and his public apologies fell flat. The viral footage had exposed not just his prejudice but the fragility of his carefully crafted persona. He faded from the spotlight, a cautionary tale of what happens when privilege goes unchecked. Ayanna stood at the pass, watching her staff move with purpose. The clatter of plates, the laughter of guests, it was everything she'd dreamed of. She thought of that night at the Pinnacle, the weight of Richard's words, the fear that she'd lose everything. But she hadn't. She'd fought, and she'd won, not just for herself, but for every person who'd ever been judged before they could speak. Legacy wasn't just a restaurant. It was a promise, a place where everyone, no matter their background, could sit at the table and be heard. As Ayanna plated a dish, her hands steady, she smiled. Her dreams were no longer out of reach. They were here, now, in every bite, every story, every guest who walked through her doors.